Well, the good news is that we are recording. So, although
Mhm.
some people may not be able to be up at the moment to attend in person virtually, at least we have, I'm sure that there'll be a wide range of people tuning in afterwards for the recordings. And I
100%.
you, and I'd like to welcome those who are attending right now. Thank you very much for being with us today, this evening, this morning, this morning. And so, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Clarice Garcia, who is presenting with us today. And if you have any questions at any point, please do feel free to raise your hand. I can, given that there are smaller groups, I can pass, as they say, the mic over to you, to the people in the room in order to ask questions or provide comments at any point that you wish. Certainly do feel free to use the chat function as well, for those who may be possibly more introverted and prefer to write their questions down. That certainly is welcome. And so now I'd like to welcome Clarice on the theme of Imagerying Beyond Possible Worlds. Clarice, thank you.
Thank you so much. So thank you everyone for attending. It's a pleasure to be here. Just share my screen so you probably can see my keynote. I'll jump it there. So I will not be seeing you, but apparently it will be a better experience to present in this way. So just a second. Just a minute, I'm trying to find a file. Oh, that's here. Lovely. So, so as part of the conference, I'm presenting this work that is like a piece of the results and the findings that I've got from my PhD. So it's not a complete PhD result, but it's like one step that I consider very much important in thinking about possibilities for new methods and processes for futures thinking. So basically, what I developed in my PhD was what I called fashion futuring, which is a methodology to spark imagination and a values-driven transition towards sustainable futures. And fashion futuring is a card game inspired by the works of Stuart Candy, the Global Swarm, and the Near Future Laboratory. And fashion futuring actually explores possible relations between objects, fiction, culture, and systems, exactly to spark imagination, but also to help fashion stakeholders or stakeholders in general to envision values to guide them towards a transition into sustainable futures. So fashion futuring is formed actually by 7 tools. But for the scope of this presentation, I'll actually focus on just 2 of them, which are Impossible Worlds, which is to help participants to use imagery as prompts and dive into like fictional stories and fictional scenarios, so completely detached from what a real world might be or what a possible world might be. So it's basically this collective or collaborative imagination that goes very much into fictional stories rather than in reality. And the second one is, I called it Wearing Fiction, and it basically explores helps participants to design and create the scenarios for futures by co-designing a fictional artifact and exploring like societal and cultural values that might be embedded in such design solutions. So in Impossible Worlds, I used like 2 different sets of things. So one thing was like the images, as I said, and also I used some questions. And then, as I said, participants could try to develop in like some scenarios. And in Wearing Fiction, again, we were kind of designing, going from that scenario and exploring the scenario through artifacts, fictional artifacts as well, using cards as prompts and also images as well. So in doing my workshops, I draw on participants' feedback to kind of recognize the value of an imagery-driven process in futures thinking. So in my first attempt, what I had was like this set of cards. So I had a persona, artifact, fashion and textiles, materials, context, and technology. And then, like, based on participants' feedback, I understood that I had to change a couple of things. But before going there, the context cards were like based in the archetypes of alternative futures. So I got inspiration from there, and then I designed like those like potential contexts for futures, for example, of context of joy, or a context of illusion, or enlightenment, isolation, inequality, or earth connection. So I kind of proposed these possibilities that we had, like kind of, you know, like a sort of given social cultural scenario in the future for participants to dive in. And also, I also had the persona cards, and the persona cards were actually a brief description of a hypothetical future user in terms of fashion, in terms of also demographics and attitudinal aspects. So I created a kind of kind of personas to kind of help participants to design the artifacts. So it was very much like based on design methodologies, as design thinking and others. And in doing so, I tried to, of course, to cover a sort of variety and diversity in these personas and also in the contexts. But what happened in the end was that participants kind of gave me some feedback that were pretty important for informing my approach towards like futures thinking practices. And so they said, for example, that the future contexts seemed fairly typical. So they wanted more out of the box options to imagine futures. And also they were saying that actually like the personas, and so the context should be more diverse, but also the personas do not necessarily match, or not necessarily were kind of relevant for the context that they started proposing during the workshops. So I started to consider that I had to change my approach. I think that like participants in general felt a little bit frustrated and disappointed by, you know, the restriction that the workshops and the cards were also actually giving to them. Instead of giving alternatives and possibilities, the cards were kind of limiting their imagination somehow. So I think that it kind of started to put some light on some challenges that we have as foresight practitioners and also people interested in imagining futures. Like, how can we let go the need of control and desire to preserve a sense of security and predictability in terms of futures thinking and in terms of scenarios, especially speaking. So I was thinking, how can we actually embrace the unknown and go further in the imagination stage rather than controlling, as I was exactly like controlling during the workshops through cards that were not kind of giving to participants all the potential possibilities that they could have and they could explore. So I understood that like there is this thing, this quote is pretty important, which is like, while these actual words appear to be real, complete, in fact, what happens is that fictional worlds are intrinsically incomplete, ambiguous, and maybe inconsistent. So I was thinking that while trying to follow and to create like a new practice or a new approach to futures thinking, following like previous attempts or previous works, as I mentioned before, The Thing from the Future by Stuart Candy and others, I was thinking that maybe following this idea was kind of more a sort of limitation rather than an opportunity to expand imagination. So I realized that merely like creating cards was not necessarily fruitful and helpful to help participants to really expand the possibilities around futures. And so I was thinking that we maybe should kind of embrace the potential that comes with acknowledging our own ignorance about future. So what we don't know, what is beyond what is probable future, or what is a possible future. So I started to think that we maybe should embrace the sort of impossible futures as a manner to navigate through this. So what I did was like I eliminated the context cards, and I changed them by these ones. There were cards that were just imagery instead of sort of written context. And so what happened with that is that by exploring these like different possibilities, I understood that I was like playing a little bit more into the intersections between culture, imagination, fiction, and reality. And so it happens because this ambiguous play between mind and word, object and image, perception, conception, and representation is something that comes from images. Images are not like a final text or a final answer or something that is not open-ended, but otherwise they are pretty much open to ambiguous interpretations. So I started to think that actually we could all these gray zones between what is factual, what is reality, what is abstraction, what is an evidence, and what is pure imagination. And I found that we had actually a huge opportunity here to expand the power of creation things by looking a little bit more into this fragmentary interpretation, because when you look at an image, it doesn't give you like a picture of something that is like perfect, contained somehow. It's actually expandable. And so I thought that it could be a better exercise of creativity instead of going into a more sort of predictive structure for the workshops. One thing to consider is that in reflecting about like what kind of images should I bring to this process, I found that I should kind of rely on images of artists and arts in general, because actually they come with this idea of playing with ambiguity and interpretation. But also I found that I had to put somehow a sort of social context on them. So instead of just having very much abstract images, I started to think that I should have, for example, have some hints in the images that could kind of give us some points of reflection on what society might be doing or living, or how it might be in the future in terms of society. So when we used as prompts, these images, they actually helped participants to embrace the unknown and this more fiction-oriented approach and this more open-ended and design-led process. So this inherent ambiguity in the images that we had in the workshops, they actually had the power to redirect imaginaries from probable futures towards more fictional worlds that I'm calling impossible worlds, liberating us, at least for a moment, from the dirty of finding plausible futures or knowing what might happen next. When participants looked at this image, for example, they said, it looks like a mix between primitive life and the virtual, a place in harmony, a peaceful and magical landscape, but also it is something where everybody is very individualistic and living their own and making their own magic. I also proposed some images from kind of sustainability related themes, just to help participants to not forget that the role and the goal of the workshops was kind of helping us to transition towards sustainability. So the images were not just about climate change necessarily, but also like I had like indigenous peoples and animals and things like that, kind of to reorient and to help them to dive into the sustainable aspect of this practice. So in one workshops, when a participant looked at this image, she said, I was really not expecting it. I feel so emotional. This image is so impactful, so powerful. It shows that in our scenario, we were completely ignoring these communities. And so I guess with this quote, we see that actually the images, they have a power to kind of raise a more emotional reaction and a more emotional approach to futures thinking, leaving behind the rationality of it and really diving into a more intuitive process. So I also created like some cards that were kind of ambiguous questions just to help participants to go further on that. But actually, the primary role of this presentation is again about the images. I'm taking some moment to look at the time. So in the workshop, so I'm bringing some results here just to help us to think about the process. So I ran this workshop with 17 participants. It was online, and they were in Brazil, and they were designers and design students. And I tried to investigate, since they were designers, I tried to investigate like the role of images in thinking about futures in terms of processes. I think that I had a research question in mind for this workshop specifically speaking, which was like, what is actually the benefit of using images as a strategy for futures thinking instead of as a speculative design is used to create not only things, but ideas. But normally when we see speculative design practices, we are very much kind of intrigued by images, by the results of the process, but the scenarios that are kind of depicted somehow into visual representations. So I was thinking, what else can images bring to us rather than a final scenario, right? And so here just one example of how participants went into this process. So they designed it by looking at those two images. They designed this scenario, which they said that we were trapped and isolated in spaces in the future to give nature some time to regenerate without our interference. They also said that in this future, people were more contemplative, and also those spaces, these traps was kind of, they had a small window to the skies in a sort of way that it was a portion of nature that we could have access to. They said that outside this space, only indigenous peoples could be allowed to be in real contact with nature. And they said that in this future, we would be living in a moment of pause, reflection, and sadness, but also that there was some hope for a better and free future. This is kind of some images of the process of designing artifacts based on that scenario. Very much so, like different ideas, different sketches. And again, the power of producing sketches and thinking through imagery was pretty powerful in this workshop. Also, they said that, like, as a result, they started to dive into the scenarios through the fictional artifact. And they said that they had this kind of growing live code where the development of growth of this fabric was actually a sort of representation of the passage of time and its landmarks. And so they said, for example, that this was actually a sort of ceremonial tonic, that through it, someone could actually show memories and experiences in life as the garment would be growing over time instead of just being fixed on time. And then they said it's like indigenous communities that people use feathers or neck rings to demonstrate age, but also social position and wisdom. They said that in this future, then this artifact shows that we value heritage, slow time, regeneration, and memories. This was another example of this workshop, another group. They got like this idea that we were living in a pause, they had those two images as prompts, and they said the planet has been transformed in an enormous landfill where people were kind of living on the margins of society, and they were called hybrids. And they were actually a mix between humans and animals, in a way to survive into like this kind of landfill landscape. So they said that these beings managed to escape planetary devastation, and now they live in their own way. When these participants dived into the artifact stage, they said they created this fashion artifact, and they said that it was an accessory that works as a tool for adaptation of human beings to a harmful and nasty environment. They said that this artifact was actually a DNA editor that would be sensing environmental conditions and helping us to adapt our skills to survival skills, borrowed by all the animals, such as nocturnal vision and fat storage. And they said that in this future, fashion is not about self-expression, but it's about reconfiguration, adaptation, and survival mode. So what I found based on participants' feedback was actually that visual prototyping should not be an end per se, but it should be a path to stimulate ideas and to go into this deep diving into scenarios and into impossible worlds, generating more ideas and more possibilities rather than narrowing them down. It was a strategy to expand our imagination. And so as we can see here, like participants said that the sketches of artifacts were actually helpful to think about possibilities beyond fashion or the artifact in itself, but it was a way to turn the scenarios more detailed and vivid. So it was a way to expand imagination. In terms of findings, I was thinking that like what this proposition gives to us is like this idea that we might need to kind of use images as a way to detach ourselves from our tendency to be into a more probable world scenario rather than impossible worlds, or scenarios that go beyond what we can imagine, unthought scenarios actually. And I think that images, exactly, they are not an end in itself, as they also can be co-opted by the market as a sort of way to kind of show like alluring images of the future rather than necessarily helping us to think about possibilities and how can we go from the presents to futures. And also like they are these porous medium for coping with uncertainty and making sense of abstraction, incompleteness in a sort of more multi-directional concept. I think that one thing for us to consider in this practice is that we could actually embrace contradictions and ambiguities rather than trying to find a final and sharp and precise response about what a scenario might be. I think that this process invites us to embrace a more adventurous spirit in futures thinking and focus on possibilities instead of certainties, accept disparate ideas as a force for challenging biased and narrow thoughts, and also these fictional images and these fictional scenarios, they can become an invitation to be more transient in terms of possibles and impossibles, possibilities, impossibilities, certainties, uncertainties, helping us to assume a more fluid, open posture towards futures. I think that there is a space, of course, for further research. But there's something for us to consider in the end. There is, like as Tony Fried points out, like speculative design has been appropriated by speculative product and market developments in the service of corporate capital. So we have to be very much aware of the obsession with creating images as a result of a process rather than a process in itself. And also, I think that when we dislocate imagery from the end of the process to the process in itself, from outcomes to becoming, to beginning, from being this final representation of futures to become a sort of more input for reflection and sharing of ideas, we actually have more space to navigate into creativity towards future thinking in a more collaborative one as well. So I guess it is this idea that Imagerying calls us to liberate our minds from searching for probable futures to embracing fiction for fluctuating in a state of ambiguity. Also, of course, there is
just checking in. We have 4 minutes left, and I know you're arriving at the end. So if participants have any questions, please get them ready so that we can cover them quickly. Thank you.
Okay. This is the last one, so there is more space for further research. And if you want to know more about this project, you can access the website, which is this one, Fashion Futuring. And thank you so much. Can I stop sharing?
I believe so. Okay. I noticed that Mike Jackson left a message for you, Clarice, in the chat about possible collaborations. And I don't know if there are any other questions or comments on your experiences.
Okay, thanks, Michael. I'll reach you out. Yeah, anyone has any questions, or there's someone that raised a hand? Michael, would you like to say anything?
Oh, I'll give him yes, he does, and I just gave him talking.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
I thought that was really brilliant. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
And I could see how you could extend that greatly. And I'd like to talk to you about that in a private conversation if we could. I've left you my email address so we could have a discussion.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Definitely can be expanded from fashion to other fields and like completely different scales as well of impact.
Yeah, I can see how to. I've been looking for something like this. I can see how to do it. I have the engine to do it.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Michael. Get in touch.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
And another comment here, Clarice, with reason. Thank you for your presentation. This is very good.
Thank you.
And I believe, unless I'm mistaken, that this concludes the questions and comments, and right on time. I certainly appreciate your presentation and sharing what you've gone through by trial and error, and much paying attention to how participants reacted. I think that was key in understanding the psychology of opening up so many doors of the imagination. Thank you very much, Clarice.